What is going on, everyone? Today I'm going to be giving you a ranking of all 5 Indiana Jones films from the worst to the best. So I just did my review for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. If you want to check out my non-spoiler review, definitely go click that video because I go more in depth than I obviously will go in this video. We are going to have spoilers for all the indie films, so if you haven't seen them before, I recommend just not watching this video. I will say right off the bat, I love all of these movies quite a bit. Even the ones that are lower on the list, I don't think are bad or unwatchable. They all hold a special place in my heart, and I have enjoyed watching each and every one of these movies. And I honestly hope they do more in the future. Obviously not with Harrison Ford. I think there's definitely more you can do with this concept. I don't think they should ever replace Indiana Jones, but you could do other characters within this universe. I would love to see a Short Round movie, for example. Bring the actor who played Short Round back. He's been doing a lot of stuff lately ever since Everything Everywhere All at Once. That would be awesome to see him in the Short Round role again. There's definitely more you can do, but for Indiana Jones himself, of course, Harrison Ford in the role, they obviously are done here. In last place, in the number 5 spot, unfortunately, is gonna have to be Dial of Destiny. And this really hurts to put it here because I enjoyed the movie. As I said in my review, I gave it a good score. I think it's a good movie. I just don't think it's better than any of the other ones. And it's definitely an unpopular opinion, I would say, because I definitely think people are going to prefer this over Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. For Dial of Destiny, the thing that just puts it lower is it just feels less special. It feels less intense. It's not as fun. The adventure isn't as adventurous, I guess you can say. There's a lot of great elements to the movie, and it definitely has that Indiana Jones feel, but it just doesn't do any of the Indiana Jones aspects better than any of the other movies, in my opinion. The only thing you could say is better is the CGI. That's the only thing that's really improved since then, but I prefer a lot of the practical effects that the original trilogy used compared to a lot of the CGI used in this movie, which at the end of the day wasn't that much of the movie. There were a lot of good practical stunts, but none of it was nearly as exciting as the stuff that they did have in the original trilogy. It's enjoyable, it's a good film, it's a solid adventure flick, but when you compare it to the rest of the franchise, it just doesn't hold up as well. And who knows, I mean, I did just watch it for the first time today. Maybe on a rewatch, maybe over time, I'll like it more. I don't know, it could possibly change, but for now, this is where it's gonna be. I thought this whole story with this dial, all the backstory and history for it was quite interesting. I enjoyed the new character of Helena to a degree. I thought some of the action was really great, especially like the flashbacks. But overall, yes, it is, in my opinion, the weakest Indiana Jones film. But like I said, that's not really saying much because the franchise is really good and consistently really good. In the number 4 spot is going to be, of course, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I expect most people to put this one in the last place. I enjoy this one probably just a tiny bit more, and this definitely has potential to change. I do think maybe it's nostalgia. I don't know. I did grow up with this movie. I was 8 years old when it came out, so maybe that has some sort of a effect on my rating. I try my best not to let nostalgia affect my ratings, but it's hard to say sometimes. But I think it's a decent movie. Most of what you would critique with this movie, I would probably critique every Indiana Jones film with, and I don't even know if they really could be counted as critiques because it's just kind of part of the charm of the franchise. Stuff like Indiana Jones surviving a nuclear blast by being inside of a refrigerator. Like, stuff like that's kind of ridiculous, but you go back and look at the other movies, he's survived some crazy stuff before as well in the other 3 original films. So it's not like that's out of the ordinary for this franchise. It's kind of consistent. There's also people who criticize the Shia LaBeouf's character, Mutt Williams, of course, him like swinging through the vines in that one scene with the monkeys. I never saw a problem with that scene. I never saw the issue. I mean, we've had crazy stuff like that before. Again, it's not that out of the ordinary for Indiana Jones. I do love the Cold War setting that this movie has, and they do actually focus on a lot of the historical events from the Cold War. They actually touch on quite a bit of it, and the, whole crisis against the Russians. Of course, Indy is clearly aging in this movie, and it kind of makes fun of it a little bit here and there, but I actually like how it plays into the story because he's not in his prime anymore. And of course the 5th one does that even more so, but this one at least touched on it for the for the first time. And I thought it worked. It wasn't too much. They weren't like constantly making fun of the fact that he's older. It was more like he just can't make the crazy jumps that he used to be able to make. He might miss a jump or something like that because, like I said, it's, he's a bit older now. There's a lot of amazing scenes though. I love the vehicle chase in the Amazons. I absolutely love the scene with the red ants. That's one of my favorite scenes in Indiana Jones ever. It's such a fun scene, such an intense scene. Of course, Marion returning was fantastic. It was the first indie film that actually felt like it connected to other indie films rather than just kind of doing its own thing, like Temple of Doom and Last Crusade did. Even Mutt Williams as a character, I really enjoyed. I think just having him there, being Indiana Jones's son, was pretty huge, and I enjoyed his character and I enjoyed their dynamic between each other. Yeah, maybe it could have had a little bit more done with it. Maybe it could have been fleshed out a little bit more if they maybe introduced Marion earlier on in the movie. But overall, I thought it was solid. The alien stuff was a bit much, I will say. I don't really think we needed to have all of that at the end. It did get a little too crazy, but I was mostly okay with it. But I will say the mystery with this crystal skull was probably the least interesting artifact we've ever seen in the Indiana Jones franchise. Not that it was bad, it just, I think it was the least interesting one. And now getting into the top three, of course, we're going to just be talking about the original trilogy, which all three of these films are phenomenal. So of course, in number 3 spot, Raiders of the Lost Ark from 1981. I do think this is most people's favorite, most likely at this point, either that or Last Crusade, but I love this film. I think it's really solid. I just don't think it's nearly as good as my top 2. But there's a lot of positives about it. First of all, of course, Marion being the second best Indiana Jones sidekick. Of course, not the best. We'll talk about the best a little bit later. But in terms of, his sidekicks, definitely the second best. And I think she's definitely the best love interest he's ever had. I mean, he's only really had like, what, 1 or 2 maybe, but definitely the best one. And of course, she's the only one to actually return and get married to him in the future films, and then of course be present in Indiana Jones 4. There's a lot of other great side characters like Sala, and I actually think the villains, although I don't think they're the most interesting villains in the world, for Indiana Jones's standards, for this franchise's standards, I do think Belloc and was then like Tot or something, the other guy with the glasses, they're probably some of the better villains we've seen in this universe. I absolutely love the acting with them, and I love how they're just after this arc the whole time and they finally get to it. And Indy does not believe in any of that supernatural crap, which doesn't really make much sense because of Temple of Doom, but regardless, he doesn't really believe in much of the supernatural stuff. And then we get to the point where they open the ark, and that scene where it just takes everyone out and their faces melt is one of the craziest scenes in any of these films. It is gruesome. It's definitely really gruesome for an Indiana Jones movie, considering none of these movies are R-rated yet. That definitely seems like something you would see in an R-rated film. Overall, it's just a solid action adventure flick, and I can really never get enough of it. In number 2 spot is going to be Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. So this one I think is also usually hailed as the best one next to Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's usually the argument between one of those two for being the best. The Last Crusade, I think one of the best things about it is, of course, Henry Jones Sr., played by Sean Connery. I am so glad they did this because it was such an entertaining aspect of the movie. The movie's pretty solid up until when he comes into the movie, but once he comes into the movie, it is 1,000 times better. He is such a great character, and his chemistry with Harrison Ford's Indy is just amazing. And then that reveal at the end of the movie that his actual name is Henry and not Indiana, which I don't know if they revealed it in 1 or 2, maybe I just missed it, but I remember being blown away when I first learned of that. The movie also brings back Sala and Marcus Brody, which again, I think was nice just to kind of connect the films a little bit, make them feel a little bit more, intertwined rather than feeling like their own separate stories. I love how it has a much bigger focus on World War II and the Nazis. Of course, it takes place before World War II, but it has a big focus on the historical events that lead up to it, way more than I think any other movies do. The character of Elsa I enjoyed quite a bit. I think it was a pretty cool twist to have this character who's kind of introduced as being another one of his lovers, but it ends up being someone who is working with the Nazis. And I actually really like her character because you learn that she actually isn't really, you know, she doesn't really believe in any of the Nazi beliefs, but she's just there just to fulfill her own personal interests of trying to get the Holy Grail. She does not care about anything the Nazis are doing. She just wants to get that Grail for herself. And there's a lot of amazing sequences in this movie, like for example when they're tied up in the Nazi base and the fire starts and then they have to get out of there. Like, that's one of the best scenes in the, I think it's my favorite scene personally, and I think the soundtrack for that scene especially was really great. And then they escape and have that amazing motorcycle chase. And then of course you have the scene with Hitler, which was just a really like terrifying scene. And then you get the scene with the tank, another fantastic scene, which leads up to the whole booby trap portion of the movie at the end of the film when they're leading up to the Holy Grail. Another amazing sequence. Who can forget about the amazing boat sequence in Venice? I mean, there's just so much to this movie that is just S-tier action adventure stuff. I love it so much. But in the number 1 spot, it has to be Temple of Doom. And I know that's unpopular. I know people will never put this movie in the number 1 spot. It's not something people usually do. It's always been my favorite. It's been my favorite since I was a kid, and it probably always will be. And there's a lot of reasons why. So first of all, let's talk about the opening in Shanghai. Love that opening. Absolutely fantastic. So intense. It starts off with such a good song that's just, it's a really catchy song. And then it just gets crazy. Indy escapes the place with Willie Scott and then gets with Short Round, and then they have to go on the plane, but then it ends up being actually, you know, led by the guy he was fighting with before. So then they crash the plane and then they get stuck in India. It's one of those movies where you're just non-stop going with the characters. There's not a lot of time for like pausing and like time jumps. It's just straight up like we're going on this adventure with them all the way through, and I really love that about the movie. I think the best thing about the movie is the horror elements that it has. It has way more than any of the other films. I mean, there's a lot of just messed up stuff, mainly in the second half of the film, of course. The first half's a little more tame, but once you get into the palace and you get below the palace and the whole spike trap, which is probably my favorite scene in Indiana Jones history. I keep saying that about a lot of scenes, but that spike trap scene is so great. It's so intense, and Willie's trying to pull on the levers and all the bugs are crawling on her, and she just finally gets it last second. And then they actually get to where the thuggy cult is, and they see what's going on, and they're taking the Molaram's taking the hearts out. It's just so horror. Like, this is a horror movie in all the best ways. I actually do like Willie Scott as a character. I know a lot of people despise her, think she's annoying. I think that's kind of the charm of her though. Like, she's not meant to be like Marion. She's meant to be completely different. She is not meant for those types of situations, which I think a lot of people hate on her. But to be fair, that's probably how most of us would be in that situation. If you were covered in bugs under a palace and then you came across some thuggy cult, I mean, you'd be complaining just as much as she is. We all know you would. It's just the truth. And then of course Short Round, the best sidekick Indiana Jones has ever had. He is funny, he is just charming, he's played by a fucking 10-year-old boy in the movie. He does such a great job, some of the best acting in this entire franchise by a 10-year-old child. I think one of the best things about this movie is the slow impending doom to the Temple of Doom under the palace. I think it's just so cool, and you slowly get introduced to it, and then when they actually get to that point, that's when the movie is just insane. And I absolutely love how Indy goes from just thinking all about fortune and glory for getting those rocks. That's all he's thinking about, right? But once he gets there and he sees all the things going on with, you know, the thuggies having slaves as their children, of course, and then he just completely changes his mindset, and now he's just there to save them. And he does return the rock to the village that they came across before. So it's big character growth for Indy. And the ending scene on the bridge is, again, one of the best scenes in the franchise. I keep saying that, but I love that scene. I think this is where Indy is at his most badass, when he's holding up that sword, he knocks down the bridge, and they all come going with it. I mean, fucking love this movie. I think my only criticism for this entire film is, why is it a prequel? It doesn't make sense why they made this a prequel. Like, I always try to think, like, what was their thought process? Why did they decide this needs to be a prequel? I don't get it. I don't understand, because it not only makes parts of Raiders of the Lost Ark not make sense because of the whole, like, he doesn't believe in supernatural stuff, yet he just experienced a bunch of it in Temple of Doom. He literally was given blood that makes him, you know, praise Molaram. Like, there's no way he wouldn't believe that supernatural stuff in Raiders. They could have easily just made this a year later. They didn't have to make this some prequel. I don't know, but that's not a big complaint. That's more of a complaint about what it does to Raiders of the Lost Ark and just not making it make much sense. But if you see it as its own movie, which is what I usually do, it's amazing. It's in my top like 30 movies of all time. I love it. It's always gonna be one of my favorites. That is my ranking. Let me know your guys' ranking in the comment section below. Like I said, it's a very hard ranking to do because I do enjoy all of these movies. They're at least good. I would not give any of them below a 7.5 out of 10, which that means they're all above good. So that's a good thing. Yeah. I will see you on my next one. Peace out.